these, I think the most hardest thing, the hardest thing to do with these two is to decipher which is which one's the urinary bladder and which one is the ureter. Now these ones, the ureter samples that we have are really tiny, so it's actually kind of hard to find them sometimes. There we go. Well, there's this specs. Pretty tiny structure because of the animal that it was taken from, I believe. This is the ureter. Okay? Now with this and with the urinary bladder, there are two things that you'll need to identify: the mucosal epithelium and the muscularis. So, as we remember from every other tubular organ that we've been looking at, the inside layer is going to be the epithelium, and then the surrounding area is where we'll find the muscle. So this lighter pink surrounding, that's the muscularis. This darker stained pink is the mucosal epithelium. Now if you remember back to when we were talking about different types of tissues, we used the ureter and the urinary bladder as an example for a specific type of epithelium. It's very specialized. What type of epithelium was that? Transitional. I asked my last class and I got a bunch of blank stares. I just didn't tell them. So mad. So good, yeah, it's transitional, right? It's also one of your questions, which is why I didn't give it away last time. But you can definitely tell that because if you look at this, it looks like it's stratified, right? It gets thinner and thicker, but we definitely have cells upon cells. So identifying this specifically as transitional epithelium will be very helpful in discerning that this is a ureter and not something else, okay? Because you're only going to find transitional epithelium here and in the bladder, and as I'll show you in a moment, the bladder isn't going to be a complete circle. We're not going to see a complete lumen with the bladder because it's just too big, right? I would be very, very, very surprised if you had a ureter on the practicum that didn't look like this. It's possible because we have slides that have, for example, just half a ureter, and so you don't really get a good idea of where the center of the lumen is. You'd obviously be able to tell from the epithelium, but the way that I'm going to explain to you initially to tell the ureter from the urinary bladder is the presence of the lumen. All right, that's going to be a really big help. If you don't have that, again, this is I'd be very surprised if this was the case, but I'm going to tell you just in case. The muscle layer that we're going to see in a second on the bladder is going to be a lot thicker, which makes sense because in the ureter, it really doesn't need much musculature to help pull that urine down into the bladder. But the bladder obviously is going to need a little bit more smooth muscle because it's going to be expanding and shrinking pretty consistently throughout the day. Okay? So you need a little bit more muscle for that. So any questions before we look at the bladder?